Chris Carter here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Today, now that the preseason is over, let's talk about where the Steelers wide receiver 2 situation stands and if they need to dip back in the trade market. We'll talk about that with Nick Farabaugh, as well as other big issues going into before cutdown day for the Steelers. All here and more on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find this show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. All right, everyone, welcome back. Nick Farabaugh from PennLive.com. He was there on hand in Detroit at Ford Field covering this last preseason game. I gave you guys my reactions to the game on yesterday's episode. So you can go back and get those. We'll get more thoughts here in this show. But I want to dip back into the conversation that's kind of always been there. It's been the elephant in the room, and it's the wide receiver 2 situation in Pittsburgh. We all know George Pickens is wide receiver 1, but with the Brandon Aiyuk trade floating around, it's still in the same place it's been in since March. That's been there. We saw Van Jefferson make some plays in the preseason. Roman Wilson's been hurt for most of the preseason. Well, really all of the preseason. He made like 1 or 2 weeks of camp. We've seen Calvin Austin. Nick, I want to ask you, is the biggest thing the Steelers have to solve before week 1 opener against the Atlanta Falcons still just wide receiver 2, or have you kind of moved on from there?
Well, I'm not sure if it's the biggest thing because as we'll talk about, I think they have questions at corner. I think they have figure out what they're going to do at tackle with the rotation there. But it's still the biggest need, I think, on the team in terms of what they can fix, right? Like you're not going to find good players at some positions out there. And it's going to be hard to find good players at wide receiver at this point, to be quite honest with you. But I don't think I've seen anything that would inspire confidence in any of the other options. Now, I think Van Jefferson has had a pretty quietly solid preseason. He's open pretty often on the film. But, I mean, you're talking about a guy that even at his peak was not a wide receiver 2. He was a wide receiver 3.
Right.
So I think they have a nice wide receiver 3 in Van Jefferson. He's been a lot better than I ever thought he was going to be quite honest with you. But doesn't mean he's wide receiver 2. So I do think they need to find somebody there, or at least somebody to supplement the rest of these guys. They have a lot of similar overlapping skill sets within their room right now. Between Calvin Austin III, Scotty Miller, Quez Watkins, and Roman Wilson when he returns. I mean, those 4 guys have like a lot of similarities. They need another big body in there that can play outside, that can go in there and block. That's what they need. They need another guy that can mirror what Van Jefferson and George Pickens do. And so I do think that they need somebody there. I don't think they're going to be able to find a true wide receiver 2 unless this Aiyuk stuff happens. But I do think what they can do is supplement what they have right now because they do need an upgrade in this room. Just haven't seen enough separation down the depth chart, to be quite honest with you. It's really been those 2 guys. We've seen Calvin Austin and Scotty Miller make flashes of plays, but we haven't seen them consistently show up on the radar like Van Jefferson and George Pickens have, which is why they're wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, of course. But I do think it's still an issue, and I think they need to add somebody here. I think they'll have options.
I think they have options. One of those options went actually during this past week, and that was Jahan Dotson of the Commanders being traded to the Eagles along with a 5th round pick. The Eagles gave up a third round pick and 2 7th round picks to get him. Nick, would Dotson have been like a good fit for what the Steelers are looking for, or do you feel like there's other guys out in there in the market that make more sense?
I don't think they're looking for a type like Jahan Dotson. I like Jahan Dotson's game as a route runner that can separate, but I don't think that's what they're going to be looking for. I think they're going to, as I said, I think what they're going to be looking for is a bigger body that can play outside and that can block. That's what I think they're going to look for. Now, maybe they could look for a guy that's 5'11", 6 foot, but can really block well. Roman Wilson's kind of the smaller guy, but is a ferocious blocker and really gets after it. That could be someone they look at. But I don't think, a route running type like Jahan Dotson. Jahan Dotson is not a very good run blocker. And my worry, if you get a guy that's a really good route runner, but can separate, is that you're not going to play enough 11 personnel where that guy's going to get so much playing time. Because even if you went 12 personnel and you had 2 wide receivers in that, in those formations, most of the time, I feel like you would just be throwing out Van Jefferson. I really do. And so, I think you want a certain type of receiver, a guy that can play outside, a guy that can go block. And, there's a few names out there that I think make a lot of sense for that. Like I'm paying attention to that Houston wide receiver room. There's a few guys in that room that could fit that mold. That look at the Packers room, their deep room as well. So there's a few guys that you could slot in there that maybe could fit that. But I think they're going to look for a very specific type, that outside receiver that can block. I think they need a blocker. That's what they need. They need, in the run game, I've watched some film of Van Jefferson this preseason. And my one real complaint of him is when he's been asked to insert on those strong safeties coming into the box on some of these runs, he hasn't really done it well. And it's given me some flashbacks of last year when the Steelers tried to turn Allen Robinson into a power slot blocking wide receiver, and that wasn't really, even though he tried. And so I think I think you'd want someone a little more adept to that role.
If you had to pick one player that's reasonably out there that could be gotten for without like shaking heaven and earth to get, is there a player like that at wide receiver that you think the Steelers should be targeting?
I don't think there's one that's like jumping out at me. I'll give you a few names though. So in that Texans room, we're talking about Mechie, Xavier Hutchinson, Robert Woods, I think might be the one guy that could be on the outs, and he is that blocking type of receiver. He's not what he used to be, of course, but he could probably be had for cheap. Could that veteran presence of an outside guy that comes in, be a blocker there, be a chain mover? It could make sense there. If you look as well, I also would look at wide receivers that have ability to play gunner because they do need gunners on punt coverage. I think the punt coverage this year, this preseason has been lackluster. They've been trying out that gunner position. So, I look at the Packers, for example, someone like Grant Dubose, a bigger body that blocks well and is a really good gunner. So I just think, names like that kind of jump off the page to me. And there's probably going to be someone that gets cut that I don't think we're going to be expecting to get cut. That maybe makes sense too, that I'm not naming right now. But those are just some names I would point out there. If we're talking likeliest option out of those guys, because I think Mechie's going to make the team. I think, Hutchinson's probably going to make the team. Like Woods, Robert Woods or Noah Brown. I think one of those two guys from the Texans wide receiver room makes sense because those are guys in the vein I'm talking about, guys that can block and guys can play outside and inside. It gives you a different skill set than what you have right now.
I feel you on that. I think that it's kind of, I was reading Mike Tomlin doing his normal Q&A with Bob Labriola and SteelersNow.com or Steelers.com, excuse me. And when he was doing this, he talked about how, one team's trash may be another team's treasure. And I wonder if that's the route the Steelers go, is that they may not necessarily wait for cuts, but they may see, hey, who's on the bottom of this pile of receivers of this team over here that's really rich at wide receiver that we could add to the room and they could jump in and be someone that fills in here.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what we're going to look at. And again, you look at the Packers wide receiver room, they're 6-7 deep there. Someone's going to be on the outs. Someone's got to be on the outs in Houston. They have 8 guys that can legitimately play on an NFL roster. I mean, it's just someone is not going to make that team. You're not keeping 8 wide receivers.
Right.
So someone is going to be cut from that room. And so the Steelers should be paying close attention to that room as well. I just think all 4 of those guys from that Texans room, they're different players, but they all make a lot of sense in different ways. They all can block. Mechie is a smaller route runner type, but he blocks really well. So there's a lot of different types of guys in that room. And I think I'd be paying attention to Houston the first and foremost, Chris, because I just think one of those 4 guys comes loose, I'd be snapping them up because they fit you and they fit you in a different way than what you have. All 4 of those guys bring a little different flavor. And they bring different things. And Robert Woods would obviously also give you a great veteran presence if that's where this ends up going, because I do think he's probably the likeliest on the outs there. So if he is great veteran presence and a guy that could be a chain mover and a really good blocker, again, you wouldn't be expecting a ton out of him, but what you would be expecting is something different, and they don't have it right now.
There you have it. Some names to look out for from Nick Farabaugh. I want to get more thoughts from Nick on what the Steelers are doing in the secondary, particularly at slot corner, because I got questions myself as I've been keeping an eye on that. We'll do that and talk a lot more here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter here with Nick Farabaugh. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I'll remind you this show is brought to you by LinkedIn. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or resources to hire. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter, joined by Nick Farabaugh of PennLive.com. Nick, let's get into this secondary talk for a little bit, because I don't think the answer at slot corner appears as obvious as what it appeared to be maybe 2-3 weeks ago, where we were seeing Beanie Bishop in practice. We saw him in the first preseason game, and Beanie Bishop kind of looked the part. He was a small, gritty guy that could run around, help in coverage, and do some things, and it looked like he was presumably the guy. But then the Steelers started messing with things around here, and then he didn't play in the second preseason game, and then he didn't start in the third preseason game, though he did come in later. Nick, what do you think is going on at slot corner, and is that current slot corner that you think will start week one currently on the roster right now?
It's tough to read because I think Beanie was going in the right direction. But I think he had an okay game against the Texans. I don't think it was like stunning, right? It wasn't like,
Right.
wow, this guy is like, boom, he's the starter. Then he came out the next week in practice, in the joint practices. He had some tough time. He competed, but it was probably his roughest week of practice that I had seen up to that point. And then he gets hurt. Anytime as an undrafted rookie, especially like that where you get hurt, you open the door. And Thomas Graham has made some plays. He has. So credit to him. But I just don't think either of these guys right now, Chris, have just grabbed the slot job. I mean, it doesn't feel like one that's fixed. It would feel like one to me that I would worry about. It doesn't mean Beanie Bishop can't have a role. I would maybe you've seen the Steelers split up the slot job before, where
Yeah.
you have a rundown guy and a pass down guy. I think Beanie in rundown situations has looked great. He's looked awesome. He's been very good downhill. He's a really good tackler, even for his size. He's fearless. I think he's a really fun player in that regard. I do think, though, do you want a pass down specific guy, a guy that maybe can come in on 3rd and 11 and man coverage, and you could trust him to man up a little more than Beanie? I think you can argue for that. Is Thomas Graham that? I'm not so sure he is. And so I think what's going on here is they've been experimenting because all these guys are unknowns. Thomas Graham has been in the league since 2021, but has played basically 300 snaps in his career. Just has not been very many, and all of those mainly came in his rookie season. And then you look at Beanie Bishop. He's an undrafted free agent. I think we still have to we have to say that he was an undrafted free agent. I mean,
Yes.
I understand he's looked very solid, but he is an undrafted free agent. And then there's no other. I mean, the options there, those are the options. There's only 2 guys on the roster that play in the slot right now. So really, I think you're looking at outside guys. I think we will see an outside guy added to this room. One, they need a gunner. Again, I keep coming back to gunner, but special teams matter, man, with these final 3 or 4 roster spots. So you could add a gunner that could maybe be a pass down nickel. And there will be options out there. You scan some guys that maybe could be on the outs. I think I look at the Eagles roster and think of a guy like Avonte Maddox or someone like that could make some sense for this team. So I think, the nickel position right now is it's a flux. I do think Beanie Bishop is going to have a role on this team in some way, but I could see them splitting up this nickel position into 2 different people. And I think that's maybe where we're heading here.
I think it's going to be really a tough decision, I think, because with how Beanie was looking and how they've used him since, it kind of suggests to me that either there was some sort of hiccup in the progress there, or they liked something else, or they wanted to see something else, and they haven't been really satisfied with what they've seen in either direction. I do wonder if the answer might be going and getting someone from somewhere else, and if this is just a question mark going into week one of who that person will be or how that person will fit. I think one guy, and I've said this before, I think Shannon Sullivan's a guy that they had last year, and I wouldn't see the harm in just bringing him back in and saying, hey, you remember that role that you did last year? Play that, and it'd be fine. I didn't think Shannon Sullivan was a big plus, but he wasn't a big minus either for the team. And I think that's what you're looking for right now is, look, this is a defense loaded with edge rushers, with young D linemen that I think are really impressive, with linebacker talent, with Joey Porter Jr., with Minkah Fitzpatrick. There's all sorts of guys to be excited about. You just need to not have liabilities in another spot, and I think that's all the Steelers are really looking for at slot corner.
Yeah, I also think we have to consider the 3 safety big nickel they have here.
True.
Casey's going to play a lot, so naturally, Deshaun Elliott is probably part of the solution. I don't think we can disclose that. They didn't run a lot of 3 safety nickel in the preseason. We didn't see that a lot because they were trying to get exposure to Beanie, Thomas Graham, Grayland Arnold. And I think I'll say this. I actually think Grayland Arnold being hurt kind of threw a wrench in the plans here. He was the coverage guy. And so
Right.
he hurt his calf. They kind of ended up having 2 guys that are more downhill run suited players in Graham and Beanie. And so it's kind of odd. Again, I think Beanie has been the better of these 2 nickels, and I think he will make this roster. I also think he's actually had some really nice reps on special teams when he's been out there. So I think he's going to have more value than just playing in the nickel. But I don't think he's going to be a guy that's going to be a 3-down nickel, start right away, play, 50% of your snaps as the starting nickel. I don't see that. So I do think they're going to bring in someone from the outside here. But I do think Beanie's going to make the team, and I think he's going to have a role on special teams and probably as a rundown nickel. But
also, I have to talk about another cornerback in this defense, and that's a guy who I think did really impress in preseason. That's Cory Trice, but Cory Trice did suffer a groin injury. We don't know the extent of it, Nick. It could be something light. It seemed like I saw reports from those people who were there. I think it was Alan Saunders tweeted that he was being surrounded by medical professionals, and then they sort of cleared away from him as if like it wasn't that big of a deal when he was being looked at. But do you think that this is a bigger issue that's going to lead to him missing significant time, or do you get the impression, hey, if he misses anything, it's just week 1 and he'll be back soon?
I think he'll be back soon. I don't think it's super severe. So I think it's, a classic groin strain. These happen. They take time to heal. But I think he'll be fine. And again, you bring up, Cory Trice now with that top backup job. He is the top backup. Joey Porter Jr. is banged up too with his own little injury. So we're talking about adding to this corner room, Chris. I mean, anybody going to be shocked if they had 2 of them? Like, it wouldn't be that surprising. An outside and a nickel? I mean, it could happen. I wouldn't be stunned if that happens. And again, I keep talking about gunners. Man, they need gunners. I'm just like, they need them. And so you can have one guy signed for that. And so I think Trice is going to be fine. I think he's definitely solidified himself as the top backup. He's played really well this preseason.
Yes.
So I think he will be the top backup, but we'll see. They're banged up in that room right now. And, even though Beanie played, I don't think Beanie is 100% either. So they're going to have to kind of manage these injuries for this next week too, because they're going to have a light week of practice here coming up with cut down day. So manage those injuries. But I do think what's going on in the secondary right now is we'll see Trice probably that top backup, and maybe we'll see someone else from behind him. And then again, in that nickel, I think Beanie will make the team, and then we'll see probably someone else come in.
Absolutely. I want to talk more with you about this defense. I do think there's still questions to be had about the secondary, but I think there's better questions, or at least more promising questions for the Steelers in how their front is being handled right now, particularly at outside linebacker. We'll talk about that next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter with Nick Farabaugh. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by FanDuel. You've heard us talk about FanDuel, which is America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then, with a YouTube TV-based plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel at any time. Just visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to download America's #1 sportsbook today. And again, that's FanDuel at FanDuel.com/LockedOn. We're back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Nick Farabaugh of PennLive.com. Nick, let's talk about this OLBs, man, because Nick Herbig was another wrecking machine yet again. And yes, it was the Lions' backups, but guess what? He was doing it to other people's starters. He's been a problem. We saw him being really impressive last year as a rookie, and he looks even sharper this year. So I say all that to say, Nick, no one's mistaking him for supplanting TJ Watt or Alex Highsmith as starters in the Steelers' defense. But I do think he raises the question of how often the Steelers should use him in this defense to keep Watt and Highsmith fresh. How do you think he factors into the snap count allocation of how the Steelers need to handle their OLBs?
And they need to handle them better than last year. I remember we were begging for them to put Marcus Golden and Nick Herbig on the field at times because Highsmith and Watt would just get to the end of games and just be done. I mean, just be gassed, man. And I think Nick Herbig can play 35% of the snaps at times when they're just rotating these guys out. Now, there's obviously going to be situations you're going to want Watt and Highsmith on the field together, and that's going to be a lot of the time. But this guy, it has proven that you can even create packages for 3 outside linebackers on the field, Chris. I think they should absolutely explore that. You saw him jut right up the middle on, I think, like the 3rd play of the game for the defense. Now, that was complete because they had a crossing route behind him, but he almost sacked Hendon Hooker just flying up the middle. This guy is so quick when you put him on the interior that good luck for a guard or center trying to block him. And then you put him outside, and then you drop him into coverage, and he's like supernatural off the ball too. I mean, he's a really fun, versatile piece. He looks a great pass rusher. His bag is much deeper than it was a year ago. He's taken this like step up where he can rush from various alignments. He can drop back into coverage. He can do a lot of different things. So I'd love to see him play, up to 30% of the snaps here and really get him going. He's a weapon, man. Like he is. He could be a sub-package weapon on 3rd and longs. He can be a huge weapon for them. And why it's going to be a huge weapon for them is not only can he be productive when he's on the field, when it's the 4th quarter and that team is trying to, have that game-tying drive against you, Alex Highsmith and TJ Watt can be at full health. It could be at full energy. And then you have their explosiveness, their bend, and their game-breaking ability at full mast. And that's what you really want out of your guys. And so I look at this rotation and I say, let Alex and TJ, make sure that they are full energy by the end of the game and use this guy because he looks like an absolute stud. And I think he is. You just look at not many guys like him in the league, to be quite honest with you, at his size.
To your point, of the Steelers who played the most snaps last season, Patrick Peterson played 1,096. TJ Watt was next with 930. Alex Highsmith was next with 909 snaps. You'd have to go way down to Marcus Golden at 230 snaps for him to go on, and then Nick Herbig at 191. So I agree with you. You could break that up a little bit. Now, granted, again, you want to still feature Watt and Highsmith a lot. They were the best edge rushing duo last year. But like you said, making sure that they're not dead going late into games, I think is a huge thing that Teryl Austin, Mike Tomlin, this coaching staff need to get down here. I also think there's another guy who could factor into here, and maybe not as a supreme playmaker, but a guy who I think hasn't done too bad when he's been asked to play that position, and that's DeMarvin Leal. He was getting back there a little bit and busy as well, along with Nick Herbig. And I know Marcus Golden was a guy they brought in for whatever reason. I guess he got injured and he had to retire, so that didn't work out. But I think Leal hasn't looked bad when they moved him out there to be at sort of edge position. And I think, still keep him as an option at linebacker. But is he your fourth kind of option there as an OLB edge rusher, or would you prefer a Jeremiah Moon or someone else? Kyron Johnson.
Kyron Johnson has been really good
He
too.
looks nice. He looks nice, and he helps on special teams.
Yeah, I mean, Kyron Johnson is so. You want to talk about what T.J. Watt, Alex Highsmith, and Nick Herbig bring? You know what Kyron Johnson brings? That absolutely wicked first step that I think is somehow. It might be. It's better than Herbig's, and Herbig's is incredible. Like he flies upfield, man. His speed, he runs like a 4.3, and you see it. He's got great bend. He struggles a little bit against the run, but in pass specific situations, Kyron Johnson can be a real weapon for them. So I really like what I've seen out of him. Leal too, man. Leal collapses the pocket. He's like a different rusher than Herbig and Johnson because he's this big 270-pound dude off the edge that's just all power off the edge. And then when he gets inside, he's so quick that guards and centers can't really deal with him. So he's like this weapon that most teams don't have. So I think you can use the rotation by matchup potentially, right? You see maybe a tackle that struggles with power. All right, Leal goes out there. You face two tackles that really struggle with speed rushers. All right, then your rotation is Johnson and Herbig. I think you can play with that. And so, I think that's really smart. And even Leal this year, Leal's going to help probably on special teams because of the new kick rules. He's probably going to be out there covering kicks and stuff with these new big bodies out there. When you have that short space, he might be out there. So you can get really special teams versatility out of all three of those guys, which helps anytime you're talking about the outside linebacker position. But the depth at outside linebacker this year is going to be really good. And yeah, I think, you can play with the fourth by matchup. You can play Leal or Johnson, depending. But I just think they're so deep there. I think, you're basically going to keep four. And I don't think Leal's going to substitute in for Johnson because I think Johnson brings his own special twist to the position and specifically at special teams. So they're super deep at this position. And then Moon's going to be on the practice squad. I mean, Moon's a really good practice squad addition too.
Yeah, I think I liked Moon. Like when I was watching him in practices, I was like, okay, he's bringing you something there. But I agree, Kyron Johnson was a difference maker in some of those practices, and especially in the preseason, I saw him also helping out on special teams. You want guys to stick around like that. But again, also, I'm not mad at the flexibility of DeMarvin Leal and how he factors in there because I thought he had a really good bounce back of a training camp and preseason. Need to see him do it in real games because he didn't do that last year, but if he does take those steps forward, could go a long way for the Steelers in helping their defensive front. And I talked about this, on yesterday's episode when I was doing my reaction to the game, Nick. But one of the things of all the things we expected of this team, or the questions that we had of this team, I did not expect defensive front depth to be as strong of an asset to them as I think it is right now. And when I say depth, I'm talking about not just edge rusher, but I'm talking about Leal with Benton. I think Larry Ogunjobi has looked refreshed, maybe because he's not injured like he was through a lot of parts of last year. I think Montravius Adams has played very, very well. And I think the guys even behind him have made it some tough cut decisions. Isaiah Loudermilk has looked better than he has in his career. You still got Dean Lowry, a longtime veteran. I think there's a lot of potentially really good players that fit in this front. And what I thought might be a weakness in the defensive line going into this season might actually not be. And that could go a long way for making this defense really elite.
Yeah, they're going to have a deep D-line, dude. Loudermilk has more pass rush shoots than he's had in his entire career. You saw some of those reps he had yesterday. Dean Lowry looked like a just solid veteran that you can trust, especially against the run. I think that's what is going to make him really useful. He's probably their best run defender in those down there. And then, as we talked about with Leal, he can be a menace inside a 3 technique, and then you can plop him outside, and he can be this big power rusher. You have really fun flexibility there. Montravius Adams is a really good sub-package pass rusher with good explosiveness. He's the type of veteran that you lean on. I think, as we've talked about with Benton, I think he's on a rocket ship this year. I think he's going to have a really good breakout year. If Ogunjobi, that's going to be the really key variable here. If Ogunjobi returns to his form that he did before the foot injury in Cincinnati, that is going to be so big for the Steelers. He was a very, very good penetrating 3 technique before this Lisfranc injury. If he's feeling good, and he's been a really good penetrating 3 technique through 2 preseason games, then I think that'll be huge for them. They are going to be deep. I originally thought they were going to keep 10 between outside linebacker and interior defensive line. I think they might keep 7 interior guys now. I don't know how you cut any of those 7. And then I think you got to keep 4 again, because you could theoretically make Leal the full-time guy, but let's be real. Kyron Johnson's earned it. He's earned a spot on the 53. So I think you got to keep 11 up front, and that's fine because that's going to be the strength of the defense between those guys. And then behind them, you have Peyton Wilson, Landon Roberts, and Patrick Queen. That front seven should be really strong this year.
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of positives up front. Still a lot of questions on this team, but we'll keep you covered all season long here on Locked On Steelers. Nick, thanks so much for joining us for another great episode here. Let people know they can find you, follow you, and get more of your work.
Yeah, you can follow me on X, Twitter at Farabaugh FB. Make sure to read the stuff over at PennLive.com/Steelers. And make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel, Steelers on Penn Live. We'll have more over there.
Absolutely. He's Nick Farabaugh. Thank you, Nick, for joining us. And thank you all for joining us here on your Monday on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Carter Critiques. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com, and find me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast every Monday through Friday on your favorite podcasting app and on YouTube. We'll see you again tomorrow with more talk on your Pittsburgh Steelers right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.